Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Cindy Scharschmidt, and I work in the Office of Global Affairs here at UW Tacoma, and we're co-sponsor of today's Fulbright Alumni panel, and the event is co-sponsored by the Office of Research. And I'm really excited to hear from our 5 panelists today who all have had experience with the Fulbright program in some shape or form. And rather than me introducing all of them, I'm actually going to have them share a little bit about who they are and what they did on their Fulbright, during their Fulbright experience. And there's 3 former students that are seated to my right, and then 2 current faculty members who have had Fulbright experiences as Fulbright scholars. Like I said before, we are recording today's event. I have a series of questions prepared that I'm going to ask the panelists, but then of course I also want to make sure that you and the audience get to ask questions of our panelists. If you have a question, just indicate that, please. And we do have a mic that we can pass around just for recording purposes. Obviously, we could probably speak loudly enough to hear each other, but it's for recording purposes. Okay, so my first question for the panelists is just tell us a little bit about who you are and your Fulbright experience. Where did you go and what did you do? And I'm going to start with Lisa.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Garcia. I was the Fulbright English teaching assistant for Brazil in 2016. And yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Do you want to say what program you graduated from?
Oh, yes. The PP&E. Sorry, it's been a while.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I did my Fulbright research in Cambodia in 2017, 2018, and I graduated from UW Tacoma in 2016 with my Bachelor's of Science, my Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science, and I worked with USAID's Development Innovation and helped girls code by teaching their instructors how to build a better curriculum.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maxim, and I was a Fulbright English teaching assistant in Burgas, Bulgaria in 2016, and I graduated from UW Tacoma with a Master of Accounting.
Hi, everybody. Wow, I am Jan Deerwichter. I teach in the Urban Studies program, and I went to Canada. And I'll tell you about that.
Hi, I'm Kathy Baudouin, and I teach in the School of Education. And I went to the University of Rijeka in Croatia, and I taught there at the university for 1 semester.
Thank you all for those introductions. I'm going to follow up with just asking you to provide a little bit more detail about what it is that you did during your Fulbright experience. Was it teaching? Was it research? And if it was research, what did you work on? And sort of give us a sense of what if there was such a thing, day-to-day life in the country looked like.
Right. So like I mentioned earlier, I was in Brazil. I was in the state of Minas Gerais, if anybody is familiar with that. I was in a very small town called Uberaba, about 6 hours north of Sao Paulo by bus. It was interesting. I was placed at a university called Universidade Federal de Triângulo Mineiro. And it's a very small university, about 3,000 students. I went into it thinking that I would be more of a English teaching assistant, so helping with grammar and helping students with their language acquisition, but it was more of a cultural position. So it was actually pretty fun. Teaching English would have been fun too, but we were instructed to put together presentations to help students familiarize themselves with culture here in the US. And the purpose was to help students or encourage students to apply to American programs for exchange purposes. So that was really cool. We put together a ton of presentations on American culture, music, dance, just things that I grew up with, which was really cool and very fun for everyone involved.
So day to day in Cambodia was me riding my motorcycle around to a few nonprofits that I initially was affiliated with. And for my research, I did a lot of cold calls trying to figure out nonprofits or universities I could partner with, and Cindy remembers that. She was vital like in that process. And unfortunately, that first affiliation didn't work out, and then I went to the U.S. Embassy and I said, I need to redefine my research and make sure that I'm on track, and how can you help me? And everyone on post was really supportive, and then they connected me with USAID, Technovation, and then that allowed me to work in 2 different cities with different teams, making sure that I could understand how technology curriculum or computer science curriculum is accessible in the city, and then in more rural areas in Siem Reap versus Phnom Penh, the capital city. And it had a reach of 500 different girls, so it was a wide reach. And my team that I worked with went to the university to have like internet access, and that was the only place they had like technology access. So my day-to-day was trying to meet girls wherever I could. One of the constraints was, how do we teach technology without internet access, without computers? So one of the things we taught, like algorithm through like bottle caps, like sorting algorithm, things that we can find like every day. So being really creative and trying to not get overheated in monsoon season. Yeah.
So I was in like one of the bigger cities in Bulgaria. It's right on the Black Sea coast. So imagine it's pretty nice in the summer and spring. So that was pretty enjoyable. But I went in there also thinking that I was going to be an English teaching assistant, but little did I know that I was going to be an English teacher. So I ended up teaching about 300 high school students independently. So that was very challenging, but just as much rewarding. And on the side, I did a bunch of other, ran a bunch of other clubs. Like I did like speech and debate and other stuff that I'll get into more detail on the next question. But yeah, day to day was pretty nice in the summer, and then in the winter it got very cold, and my goal was to basically survive the cold. So yeah.
That was my job as well, because I was there as a researcher. So I just did research. And so it's a lot like being on sabbatical, and I won't go into the weeds on the substance of the research, but the University of Calgary is interesting because it started off life as a branch campus of the University of Alberta, and then just grew because that's oil and gas country. Calgary is a city about 1.2 million. It's a big city, and they have a working group of scholars up there working on smart cities. And so I'm hooked up with them, and we're interested in doing some comparative work across North America, looking at similarities and differences between Canada and the U.S. And so my daily life was a lot like a research life. But I did, I think the one thing I'd like to highlight is, even though I was in Alberta most of the time, I went to the Maritimes in Canada, which is a really fascinating part of North America. And I went there for a couple reasons. One is it's a poor region of Canada, as is Maine. That's a poor region of North America. And Alberta is wealthy. And I thought it'd be interesting to get a contrast. And just culturally, it's so different, right? And you hear a lot of French, or something like French. It's not even Quebecois. It's a really interesting, old, more ancient culture in that part of North America. And there's more linkages between First Nations and municipalities. So there's a lot of interesting contrasts, and that was the highlight of and it wasn't as cold, but it was 30 below most of the time. So I spent a lot of time with and I brought my family, right? And so we'll get into that in the next. This was really a family experience as well, and really exploring Canadians and Canadian institutions and Canadian ways of thinking, which was really interesting and a different kind of challenge for me, because they're familiar, and you have to have a really sharp antenna to pay attention to the obvious differences, which, Kathy, you don't know anything about since you married into the...
Yeah, married a Canadian, lived there for 6 years, and loved it. So I went, when I was trying to pick out where I wanted to apply to for the Fulbright, I wanted someplace that, because I had 3 young kids and my husband. I wanted some place that we could actually afford to go and live. And so I wanted someplace in kind of more central Europe that wasn't yet on the euro. And that was a really smart decision on my part. We ended up, our chancellor at the time called me in and asked me if I would consider applying to the University of Rijeka, because Rijeka is a sister city to Tacoma. It's a port city. And I said, sure, if your chancellor asks you to do something. So I did. I got there, and it's also, right on the Adriatic, just beautiful, beautiful place. And my daily life, I taught at the university. I taught one course, and then I did guest lectures in other courses for other people. I also did some trainings for teachers all over the city, and they would set it up so I would do professional development with them in my area of expertise. And so I got a lot of opportunity with that. And the other thing that we did with 3 kids is we put them in swimming lessons, which is a big thing. And we spent lots of nights at the pool, about 4 nights a week at the pool with our kids and hundreds of other parents. So it was a great experience.
Come over here so we can start on this end this time. So my next question, actually your answer, Kathy, was a good segue. So for those of you who are maybe less familiar with the Fulbright program, what you may not know is that Fulbright, yes, sponsors opportunities like research or teaching abroad, but it's just as important that Fulbright scholars engage in the local communities in ways that make sense for that particular individual. And in fact, as part of your application, you talk about how you're going to engage in the local community beyond whatever project you're working on. And so my next question is actually, what are some of the ways that you, during your Fulbright experience, engaged with the local community beyond your project?
Well, I have 3 children, and Croatians do not have 3 children. They can't afford it. They have 2. If they're able to afford 2 children. Nothing is built for 3 children. But it made us stand out. And so we would take our kids to the playground, and people would come up to us, and they'd say, "You have 3 children," and introduce themselves to us. We were also told when we went back and got our country briefing on Croatia that Croatians would invite us to coffee, and that was it. And that was not our experience. We got invited every weekend to come to people's homes, to travel, do day trips with families, to just so that they could show us other parts of their country. Croatia has the smallest town in the world, so it's called Hume. So we had to go there with a large group of people, so we overwhelmed the town. But just so many opportunities, and I think that what I really learned from that was if somebody invites you, you just say yes. So we spent a lot of time doing that.
I should say that the Canadian-U.S. Fulbright relationship is actually the oldest one. It's the one that started it, but it's a funky one because it has a 4-month calendar. So I didn't go for a year. I went for an intense 4 months starting in January. So tropical Alberta in January. And I say this because, and I prefaced my last question by saying, Calgary is a much bigger city than a lot of people here realize. It's way over 1 million. And it has a tradition where it annexed everything, so it's just huge. So in consequence, it has very strong neighborhood associations, much stronger than our, say, neighborhood council system here, which some of you would be familiar with, either here in Tacoma or in Seattle, that other city up north. And those neighborhood associations are really interesting and varied. And so, for example, and there was one right near us, so you can get really involved quickly. It's a way for people in that big city to connect at the neighborhood scale. And they had, for example, polar parties, which is basically an excuse to play hockey. Right? And hockey is a big thing in Canada. But it's different than here. It's just people in the neighborhood coming out. The kids come out, grandparents come out, have hot chocolate. So we could do that. And then, of course, with families, you get very involved in the school system and all that. So those are the two main mechanisms. And then we're going to get into this, think, in a later question about sort of lessons learned, how you do this. But I was obviously highly integrated in a university community, and so there were lots of invites all the time. And I think we'd all probably share the welcome that you'll probably receive in wherever you go. And that was our experience. So those are the two main vehicles for me. I think if I was there longer, there would have been any number of other ways to, right?
So when I initially got to Bulgaria, I had no idea what I was going to do outside of teaching. You know, you got to kind of go there and sort of feel it out. And I was the first English teaching assistant in that high school, so I had to start kind of everything from scratch. So that was a bit of a challenge. But there's a Bulgarian English Speech and Debate Foundation all across Bulgaria. So I had the chance to start a speech and debate team at school and coach it, and also learn, because I'd never done speech and debate. But and then I also coached the basketball, the volleyball team, and there were many opportunities there. And so I wanted to engage. Is it a question? I did. I've played basketball my entire life, but yeah, I was ready for that one. And then I reached out to different demographics. I wanted to kind of engage with like the adults as well. So I started an adult English club at a local barbershop. I ended up talking to this lady, and I was like, let's just meet here, and you have friends that want to do this. And there ended up being like 10, 15 people by the end. And then I reached out to this NGO that worked with Bulgarian talented youth. So I got to work with kids as well. So I pretty much covered everything. So it was really fun.
For like extracurricular activities in Cambodia, between the two cities in Siem Reap, there aren't any Fulbrighters in Cambodia that are English teaching assistants. They're either researchers or like a huge community of Peace Corps members, and they teach English. So a lot of the Cambodians with the NGO I was originally affiliated with were working on like their exams, their English exams. So I would just encourage them and like look over their communications, and then even just sitting with them as they make phone calls in English for the first time, and just trying to let them know that, okay, next time you get to listen to me make a full phone call in Khmer, in the native language. So like trying to make sure that it's challenging on both sides for me, as though I'm Cambodian. I didn't grow up speaking Khmer my whole life. And so I think being vulnerable, doing cultural exchange, any way, any moment that you can. And then in the city, it's like so many resources. And how I got involved there was a group called the Asian Foundation that was working on this Waisili initiative. It's like Young Southeast Asian Leader. I think I'm going to butcher it. I'm sorry. But it works on cultural exchange between like the 10 ASEAN countries. And they invited me to run a workshop, which is something like I had done here at UW Tacoma and in the community. So I created this Arduino workshop, and then we had this hands-on like makey project to encourage people to like incorporate hardware and software learning. So it depended on which city I was in, how I can help and like take on extracurricular activities. Aside from that, like I made sure to shop in the like outdoor shops all the time, which was really hot and no refrigeration, and it was really, really hard because you just smelled everything. And people got around with their motorcycles, so I got a motorcycle. I tried to live like a local. I had a roommate who is Cambodian, and I really wanted to understand how Cambodians live because I was there for 10 months, ended up being 11 months, and in order to affect change, I had to let them know that I was willing for them to change me as well.
So outside of my Fulbright responsibilities, like Maxim said, I also had to feel out the city to kind of figure out what I wanted to do and how to connect with people. I immediately realized that in Brazil, people live and die by Facebook and WhatsApp. So I made sure to stay super active on Facebook and check my WhatsApp all the time because that is how people connect, even professionally. I thought it was super weird, and we'll probably get into that later, how people do not use email. It's all WhatsApp. But through Facebook, I found a lot of groups that interested me. I'm a very outdoorsy person. I'm really into fitness. So I reached out to some people that were part of this outdoorsy group that goes hiking once a week, and I met up with them, and we went to several beautiful waterfalls. We'd go rappelling, tubing, floating down rivers. It was amazing, a beautiful experience and a great way to meet locals. And I also got involved with capoeira, if anyone is familiar with that. It's like martial arts. And that was challenging, but so much fun, amazing. And I so appreciate the relationships that I established through my participation with these activities. Everyone was very patient with me. My Portuguese at the time, at the very beginning, was not that great, but thanks to everyone's willingness to help me out, to help me learn. By the end, I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but it was pretty good. I could survive. In addition to all of that, on Fridays, I noticed, since I was in a small town and there aren't that many foreigners that travel through there, people were very excited and very interested to talk to me, to talk to someone that speaks English, because they wanted to learn and they wanted to improve their own skills. So on Friday nights, my Fulbright partner and I started hosting beer nights. So we would go to a local beer stop, and whoever would show up, we would just sit down and speak in English, but then we'd also speak in Portuguese sometimes and just talk about silly things. We didn't have to talk about like academic material. People just wanted to talk to us and talk in English or speak in English, and it was a lot of fun. I really miss all the relationships that I established through all these activities.
Thank you. So I have two questions that I'm going to just combine, and you can all decide if you want to answer both of them or just one of them. And so one is, what most surprised you during your Fulbright experience? And then the other one is, what was most challenging? And in talking to you before the panel, it sounds like for some of you the answer to those two questions are actually the one and the same. That's why I've decided to combine the questions. So again, what was most surprising and potentially challenging? And we'll start over here again.
So like I mentioned earlier, everybody uses WhatsApp to communicate, even in professional settings, which was very bizarre. Before I left for Brazil, I already had a few years of professional work or time. Under my belt, probably like 3 years. I was in an office setting. You just know when you get an email, that's like you're getting a meeting agenda or something needs to get done. So that's the mindset that I went into Brazil with, but that was not a thing there. Whenever I would email a professor asking a question, they would reply through WhatsApp. So then I immediately had to just figure out, like, I need to stop using email. I need to do WhatsApp, because apparently that's the way we communicate. And it was a little weird at first, but I got used to it and it was not a problem. But another thing that also surprised me was how long meetings went sometimes. I feel like here I was used to the structure of, like, we get an agenda, we're gonna meet for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or however long, and then we're done and we're sticking to the agenda. There, we would have weekly meetings on Fridays. And going into it, I'm like, okay, cool, we're only gonna meet for an hour. They would go on for like 4 hours. And it would be because like the first couple hours, people would we'd sit down, have coffee, talk about our personal lives. And at first I thought it was so weird that I had to talk about my personal life to my professor or to my colleagues. But immediately I realized, you know what, this is fine. And it was a really great way to get to know my colleagues and the professors that I was working with. Eventually, we would also talk about work stuff, but I had to get used to those really long meetings that I was not used to having here.
So I guess I'll start out with what was most challenging. I'm Cambodian, and my parents are are refugees from Cambodia, so I thought that I would have this like amazing homecoming, like welcome to your homeland. But what ended up happening was, you're not American and you're not Cambodian. And I was like, I promise I'm one of the two. Like I'm a bit of both. And there was this like huge identity like crisis, I guess, where I had to like figure out, do I identify with my nationality? And the answer is no. Like I don't feel like I have to be American or Cambodian, and I could be a little bit of both. But that was really hard because in Cambodia, and I guess it's like it is one and the same, it was really surprising that the only like expats in Cambodia, like in Siem Reap really, were either running NGOs, and then there was a lot of tourists that were going into like the Angkor Wat's, like the I think World Heritage Site. It's amazing. And the schools are just only for Cambodians, so they don't have like this diversity in students and experiences because they all went through the same educational system. So I found that very interesting. So they had to like really search for understanding of the world outside of their classrooms, and that came in the form of like tourists, someone like myself. But then they were getting a lot of tourists from Australia and Europe, and Americans who don't look like me, more like Max. and so they didn't really know, and they're like, why would you ever want to go to Cambodia when all we want to do is go to the US? And so we had a lot of meaningful conversations about why Cambodia. And for me, it was personal because I wanted to understand like my parents' journey a little bit more, and I wanted to, after genocide is completely different from what my parents remembered, but I wanted to somehow be a part of that. And fortunately, kind of segue, my whole family, like 6 members, went to Cambodia because they figured I survived for 9 months, and so that it encouraged them to go back for the first time. And so the Fulbright journey, like the Fulbright experience, it was so meaningful for me, but then also for my family. So the most challenging was it made me think about my identity more, about being Cambodian American. And then the most surprising was that the lack of diversity. And so I'm really fortunate to have been there to say, like, the world isn't what Siem Reap is. It's so different in the U.S. Like you could, like especially at UW Tacoma, where we have like generational like diversity as well as like religious diversity and just like how we identify. So I think it's wonderful. And when I was able to explain that to them, they thought they found, I guess, they were encouraged to ask me about like political beliefs, because in Cambodia you're not allowed to really talk about your beliefs. And I said, in America we all have our own beliefs and we can talk about them. It might not always be a fun conversation, but we're entitled to speak about our own like beliefs. And so that was interesting that they heard that from me, that I'm not afraid to say who I believe in, like, and who I think is a good leader. And so that's like making little shifts in their minds about how they could be new leaders in Cambodia.
So I think one of the biggest challenges for me was I was going to Bulgaria knowing that, I have Bulgarian roots. Both of my parents are here today. They're both from Bulgaria. And, well, not from Bulgaria, but they have roots in Bulgaria. But so I walked in there thinking, I know everything about this country. I'll be fine. I'll fit in. But coming to find out, I speak this outdated Bulgarian from 300 years ago. And so I felt like, I was speaking Shakespeare to, modern, English speakers. So that was fascinating. I was getting corrected and heard a lot of chuckles here and there. But so that was definitely, I thought that was challenging, but it was rewarding because I got to, hone my Bulgarian speaking skills. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I walked in there thinking I was going to be an assistant, but I ended up having to teach. And teaching, I got to tell you, that was, I had to take on so many roles. You learn so much from one day being a teacher, the next day you're a babysitter, the next day you're you're a parent, the next day you're a friend. So you get to connect in so many different ways, on so many different levels, and it really helps with like self-development. So yeah, that was interesting.
And just listening to these three students, we have a student in our program who's going into the Peace Corps this summer in Namibia, and I could just kick myself that I didn't get him to come here and hear their experiences. I mean, when you mentioned the Peace Corps, connections you had and some of the challenges that they'll experience. It's a hard one. I think, Canadians have a well-earned reputation of being super nice. I mean, it really is, and so it's sort of a stereotype, but it's true. And I think my biggest challenge was to ask for people's time, because I was there as a researcher with loads of time. Not loads. Well, it was accelerated, but my biggest challenge was to ask for people's time. Busy people, mostly professionals who I wanted to connect with and take their time. And time is the most valuable thing you have, particularly as you age, you realize this. And so I think my challenge was, not feeling like, because all Canadians, they'll say yes even if they're busy, and give me their time. And I think it was a matter of, no, I need some of your time, and you're hosting me, and let's connect. And so I was struggling with a little bit of that. And also it was important because developing friendships in an accelerated way, and that only happens when you have a density of contacts with people. You develop friendships over time. You have experiences with people, and that creates a bond. And so I was aware of those dynamics, and I just felt like, they're really busy, and it's winter, and everybody's really cold, and then I kind of want to meet me at this cafe, and I found that I was surprised by how sometimes reluctant I was to cold call or get somebody, phone them up in their office, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee, or let's go out to lunch, when I knew they had a lot on their agenda. And Canadians are nice, and they wouldn't say no, and I knew they wouldn't say no, and I was worried about that. So that's I surprised me a little bit, and it was a little bit of a challenge. The other thing was, in any kind of research, when you're asking for interviews of professionals who also have little time, particularly in the Maritimes, where I was really unfamiliar with the context, and people gave me their time. But it is something to bear in mind, because to go back to some of the earlier comments and some of what you guys, mostly even Canadians are happy to see us Americans. Most people are happy to form new friendships, and they're interested in you if you're interested in them.
So we had this phrase that we learned from a person who helped us get a car while we were there. And I'm not sure we got the car actually legally, but we bought a car that we would then sell back to this person down the road. And the vice chancellor of the university helped us on that deal. And yeah, we met in a parking lot. It was all fine. So we had some interesting, but he had said at one point, he says, it is what it is. And we said that a lot because we lost a lot in translation. So we would be speaking with one of my colleagues who, she had spent a year in the States in a cultural exchange, and her English was very good. And we would think that we were really understanding each other, and then we would show up someplace and she wouldn't be there. And it wasn't because she was just ghosting us. It was because we didn't understand. And we kind of felt like a step off on just many cultural experiences that we had there, but it actually left some beautiful memories for us. Probably the most surprising thing for me, and the most problematic for me, was kind of the leftover pieces of communism that I didn't really understand how to deal with. So, for example, I had to go to the police station almost at least 4 times a week to stand in a different line each time. I'd get a number, they'd call me different, you'd get in a different line, and you'd get up to the front to get my visa that I had to have, because if you go beyond your 3 months, you're in deep trouble. And it took me almost a week shy of my 3 months to actually get the visa. And each time I would get to the front, they'd say the computer's down, or they'd say, I'm sorry, no one speaks English today. And that was a little problematic, because I needed that to be legal. And so that was concerning. But looking back on it, I mean, eventually it got to the point where it was like, yeah, I'm just going to go hang out at the police station over lunch. And it was fine. It was actually all fine. And I just really learned a lot through the experiences. So and it's a big shift in culture from the U.S., but what a lovely, wonderful place to be. And you can learn a lot. So.
Great. I think all of those experiences speak really well to, right, I think even the goal or the mission of the Fulbright program, which is to really have meaningful engagement in another place and to challenge some of the values and beliefs that we think are the right ones. And so I think, thank you for sharing all of those challenging and surprising examples. I just have 2 more questions for the panelists, and then I want to make sure that you all get to ask your burning questions as well. But my next question is about the longer term impacts of your Fulbright experience. And I know, Jan, you're just now getting back, so you may not yet know what the long-term impacts are. But I'm curious how the Fulbright experience has shaped your professional or academic paths, and for those of you who are faculty, maybe more specifically, how you think the Fulbright experience has helped to shape your research or teaching.
Okay, so I went over to teach and ended up just making friends with my really great colleagues at the university and continuing on our relationship through research. And so I have actually been back as of next Tuesday when I fly back to Croatia. That'll be my 3rd time going back. We have published several articles together in English, and we for research that we've done over in Croatia. And I will work with these people for the rest of my career, and then just hang out with them as friends for the rest of my life. So it's been great.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it's easy for me to answer. I think I've been long interested in comparative urbanism, and a lot of my early work was on South Africa, and I've recent years been involved with Europeans. And this big giant neighbor to our north, which is like us. There's a book comparing Seattle and Vancouver. It's called Distant Neighbors. And I was absolutely intrigued by everything I was learning about Canada and its different institutions, its similar challenges around sprawl and automobile dependency and all these things that we have, but it's different institutions. So it's just a beautiful contrast. And so the connections with the folks up at Calgary, as well as some connections I made in Maritime, will definitely lead to more exchanges. And also, I should say, we're hopeful that we can, they have a nice urban studies program up there, so we're hopeful. We've been discussing things like joint courses in Europe between our students and their students in Bulgaria or somewhere, you know, or, where Canadians and Americans are going together in a different world region. So those are conversations we started at around teaching and student and faculty exchanges, which I hope, you know, are interesting and can go somewhere, and so that just came out of a little 4-month thing, and but yeah, I would encourage all of us to think more. There's a lot of opportunities, and it's a wealthy country, and there's a lot of research opportunities up there. I also will say I was in a geography department, a real geography department that has physical geographers, and there's a lot of really interesting work on. I was talking with a lot of physical geographers there about Arctic changes, and they're a center of studying, of course, climate change too. And so there was a lot of really interesting things, and expanded my mind in lots of ways.
So I think Fulbright sort of, at that time I was sort of at a crossroads. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I was sort of pursuing medicine, but still on the fence about it. And I think Fulbright gave me that year off, which happened to be, very productive. It gave me that year off and allowed me to kind of focus on self-development and sort of, build myself into the person that would, that would make a great doctor. And so and during my time there, I also had the opportunity to shadow a neurologist, the entire year I was there. So that was kind of interesting, like getting familiar with their healthcare system and the way they run their healthcare. And so after that, I kind of gained the confidence, and I'm now applying to medical school.
I'll start the UW's HCDE program, Human Centered Design and Engineering program, in the fall. And so I'll be able to build upon my research that I conducted and the data that I collected in Cambodia. So that's like a very direct way of how I'm moving forward with my research. But a professor that I worked with, she was a Fulbright scholar and from Texas, and we worked on the YC STEM workship together, and she's in Malaysia, so she invited me to go help her. And so I'm still connected with the professors there. I feel like, especially when you're tapped into like the Asia Foundation or something like that, and you help on a strategic level, they'll still think of you. And so I'm really fortunate to have that relationship that I wouldn't have otherwise if it weren't for Fulbright. So, and then moving forward, thinking about how do I continue to build relationships with Cambodia, I definitely want to do some research, maybe a quarter or something that for like my capstone, and to really just tie a nice little bow over my research, because I feel like towards the tail end of it, I got into a pretty bad motorcycle accident and kind of left as they medevaced me to a different country. So there's still some things that I want to work on, but everybody's been really understanding, and I was able to do good work still. And so hoping to, I think it's going to be like a lifelong passion of mine to build relationships between the U.S. and Cambodia.
So I was also at a bit of a crossroads when I went on my Fulbright. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And up until that point, I had just always worked to survive because my family depended on me. So I never really put much thought into what I really wanted to do long term. So thanks to the Fulbright and the flexibility that I had with the program, I had time to really explore my options and explore what my interests were. Something that I'm really grateful for is that I live so close to Sao Paulo, and some of my close friends live there. And one of my really good friends was working with a nonprofit that was working with a lot of refugees and immigrants, since there was a huge influx arriving in Sao Paulo at the time. So whenever I was in Sao Paulo, I'd go there every so often just to help out and just to really see what this nonprofit was that he was doing work with. And I immediately just fell in love. And I knew that that's something that I wanted to pursue, or at least explore a little further once I returned to the U.S. And that's what I did. I currently work at a nonprofit based out of Seattle, but we have locations all over. And now I'm applying to law school. So hopefully I can pursue that path and pursue a path in human rights law. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And so my last question, since there are some folks in the room who I think are thinking about applying to the Fulbright themselves, so either the student or the faculty program, I was wondering if you had any advice to share with those that are thinking about a Fulbright application of their own, or phrased slightly differently, anything that you think that you did in your application that helped you succeed.
So I definitely recommend taking your time. I applied twice. The first time I applied, I don't want to say it was on a whim, but a friend told me about it at the tail end of August. I started my application in September, and the deadline I think that year was like beginning of October. So it made sense that I did not get it the first time. It was just I did not put that much thought into it. I didn't realize at the time that for a Fulbright, you really have to pour yourself into it and give it the time that it deserves if you really want to get it. And I realized you have to be vulnerable as well. I made sure to reach out to a lot of people that I knew would provide meaningful feedback and feedback that would strengthen my application. Sometimes that can be a little scary to be extremely vulnerable and give that material to someone to ask for critique or some feedback, because it's terrifying, but I promise that it is definitely worth it. And I think that's what definitely helped me the second time around. I reached out to a lot of people that I trusted and that I knew would provide great feedback, and I think that's what definitely strengthened my application the second time around.
I'm glad you applied twice, because that's really awesome. Yeah, it was a mess, the application process. I was graduating from school. I was still taking summer classes. I was a student body president, so I was handing over the organization off to the new team and trying to ramp them up to know with the new policies and procedures of the new constitution we were working with. So I was spread really thin, and Cindy said, "Oh, you should apply for this opportunity." And I was like, "I don't know. I have exams." And so I don't think I touched it until September. And I remember in your office, I was crying a lot because I had to put all those hours that you mentioned, but I just did it in a week. And it made me mad because I think I went through 40 different iterations. I went to the point where I just stopped keeping the previous version, and I just kept writing and writing and writing until where I thought, okay, this is exactly what I want it to be. And at first it was really confusing because I kind of wanted to go because my parents went. So it was really focused on my parents. And then thankfully Cindy mentioned, we really want to know who you are. And so I use that same type of writing style to focus more on myself, telling my story about what I wanted to learn, what I wanted to get out of that experience, and but doing it in a way that they could see that this is a person that will succeed in that area. So being really clear with my research, and the phases of how I was going to approach my research, and who I was partnering with. And so I think that really helped that I just reached out to a few people, and they're like, "Who's this random person from the U.S. that wants to Skype with me and be my friend?" And I'm happy for that friendship because they wrote a really nice affiliation letter, and I think that's specifically for research. I don't think it's for ETAs. So I had a lot to do. I would say be open to the process. It's not going to be easy. Keep at it if you want to do it, and just know that what I told myself was you have to give it all that you have, because I knew that I was going to either go into industry or go into grad school. And so I did apply to industry and grad school, and I was like, I'm such a loser, I'm not going to get anything. And all three of them came back, and I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. But luckily they allowed me to defer grad school, and then they allowed me to do an internship in industry. So wherever, if you're at a crossroads, apply for everything, and good luck. Yeah.
So I also ended up applying twice. I remember the first time I was applying, I wasn't taking it seriously. I really wanted it, but I remember Cindy was sending me emails, every week. How's your essay going? And I wasn't really keeping up with what I was supposed to be doing. And as you may guess, I didn't get it the first time. But the second time around, I learned a lot of lessons. And again, I was working with Cindy, and this time I definitely started early. That's one thing. If you're planning on applying, just start early. Start reaching out to a bunch of different people. What really helped me was just having many different people and sharing, sort of having their perspective and kind of giving me their feedback. And just continuously revising it, editing, revising your essay over and over. And that's my best advice to anyone who's willing to apply.
Well, academics are used to rejection. We get rejected a lot, and that's the nature of the game. And I also applied for a Fulbright, a totally different program called a Global Flex, which I didn't get. And I learned from that. Everything you said is true. Start early, share your statement with colleagues. So I have no idea why my particular one was accepted, except I kept working at it, right? The other thing I'd say, one thing I learned was, and it may be applicable in some cases more than others, but after you've been accepted, I should have taken more direct initiative. It kind of relates to what I was saying earlier. Find out who the program administrators are. Find out the people on the other side who are going to actually be helping you, and not sort of just sit back and let Fulbright and host institutions assume they're all just living their lives to make you feel comfortable. It's kind of up to you to find out who's doing things and to take some initiative. And I was a little reluctant to do that. I didn't want to assert myself in the process. You have a kind of a culture of peer review, and you keep yourself out of it. But once I was accepted, I wish I would have maybe taken a little more initiative and found out who's the person who's giving me the office, who's the person who's going to give me the university card, who's going to, and also just reach out to people like you had mentioned, maybe even call them and say, I'll be coming, and it'd be great to meet with you. And I think I could have done a better job of that. And I think even if you have a year or 10 months, it goes so fast. It just goes so fast. And if I were in my 20s again, I mean, some of you, I would apply to Fulbright, and I would look at other kinds of programs that are available to young Americans who are looking to have international experience. There's literally dozens of different things you can do. I just mentioned a student of ours that he's only the second student I've had since I've been here who's gone to the Peace Corps. And my goal is to kind of encourage more of my students to at least look at it. Peace Corps, Fulbright. There's a lot of other things you can teach for a year through multiple teaching programs. Harvard offers one. Because I'm giving advice to 20-year-olds, but the best chance you have is in your 20s. And then after 30, things start getting harder. And so go for a year, take that gap year, just do it, because you say, I'll do that, and you won't. And so I think if you have a friend or somebody that's sort of thinking they're not too sure, they want to think grad school or industry, taking a year and going somewhere and doing something different, and that's going to reflect on you so well, and you're going to have multiple opportunities in life. You're going to go to medical school, or you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be clamoring after you, and just do it.
So I was thinking, if I had listened to those three and all the things that you did during your Fulbright, I would have had better ideas on writing it. So I think if you're going to apply, you should rewatch what they said, all the things that they got engaged in, because I think that is very important. I think the thing to remember is Fulbright is incredibly prestigious around the world. I did not have any idea what a big deal it was before I got to Croatia. I really did not understand how it was viewed, and it is really a wonderful thing. So understanding that, if you're kind of a shy person about reaching out to get those letters of support from other institutions, don't be shy, because if you tell them and they think, we might be connecting with somebody who would be a Fulbright with us, that's huge. So it's looked at as very positive rather than, you're taking their time for nothing. They really do love to have Fulbrights in all aspects of the Fulbright come and work with them. I think I know for the teaching part of it, what I really tried to show in my application is that I really could teach across cultures within my own country, within just the differences between the Canada and the U.S. because I've taught both places, and just really trying to show them that whatever you're applying for, that you're going to be able to carry it out. So if it's research, you're going to be able to get in country and do that, or if it's teaching, that you're really going to be able to do that aspect of it as well, and do a really nice job of it. So that would be my advice. But also, how much work you all put into it, so did I. So it takes a lot, doesn't it? It takes as much time as you can possibly give it. And I actually waited up the evening that they were opening up the positions, like the different countries. My husband and I got up at like midnight and like checked them, because we wanted to be able to jump on it right ahead of time and make sure that I started going with the application process as soon as possible. Kind of a little over the top, but worked for me.
Great. It's wonderful to see all of that enthusiasm and excitement for the Fulbright program. Unfortunately, I am worse at keeping time than I thought, and it is 6:30. So what I'm going to suggest is that we actually stop the recording at this point, and thank our panelists for sharing their experiences and their expertise. And if you still have a few minutes, I would still invite questions from the audience, but rather than recording them, I would just have a slightly more informal conversation. So thank you again.